On September 10, 2025, Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck. The American activist and youth leader became the latest victim of a rabid fanatic. The Western world was gripped by political terror, including assassination attempts on Trump and Fitz, the murder of Kirk, and a string of mysterious deaths of right-wing politicians in Germany. What unites them? All of the victims, whether killed or miraculously saved, advocated rapprochement with Russia. Coincidence or a carefully planned operation? Access Code conducted its own investigation and discovered who is behind the epidemic of political assassinations and assassination attempts in the West. The trail led to influential U.S. clans. This is the financial report of an organization responsible for many crimes. Its sponsors include the Soros and Clinton families. So who is carrying out these dirty contracts, and why are the richest people on the planet paying for assassinations of politicians? You're a nobody, but you can go down in history as everyone recruits future killers for you. And what does Ukraine have to do with it? If you can't get your message across, deliver it with a bullet, an explosion, or something else. A shadow army paid for by billionaires. How many extremists can take to the streets at a client's request? So any company can immediately tap into this Antifa network. Yes, radicals who are used to fighting, used to hooliganism, to causing mischief. A series of mysterious deaths of German politicians. How long are Antifa's arms? The chances of becoming a DG candidate and dying are, well, many times higher. There's even a, joke, challenge. Run for the AfD and live to see the election. There's a pattern in world history. The number of politically motivated assassinations and murders increases sharply when society is divided. For example, in Europe in the 15th century, during a confrontation between Protestants and Catholics, King Henry IV of France was assassinated. At the height of the Black American struggle for civil rights, 57 years ago, Martin Luther King was shot. The terrorist execution of Italian Prime Minister Aldora in 1978 came at the height of the struggle between the right and left in Europe. Finally, the current rift in the European Union was marked by the assassination attempt on Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico. The recent assassination of civil rights activist Charles Kirk in the United States also ranks high. The American press called this murder the opening shot of a new civil war in the United States. Modern U.S. history has never seen such a surge in political terrorism. From January to June of this year, 150 acts of political violence were recorded in the country, double the number for the same period last year. More than 20 people have fallen victim to the undeclared civil war in the United States. And the death of Charles Kirk is, perhaps, a message to President Donald Trump, who himself almost fell victim to an assassin during the election campaign. So why are ideological opponents increasingly using guns as a deadly argument in the West? December 6, 2024. In New York, Brian Thompson, the head of one of the largest insurance companies in the United States, was shot point blank. Many Americans sympathize with this murder. People believe that insurers have lost their conscience and are defrauding up to a third of their clients. Luigi Mangione, who turned out to be a lone avenger, had health problems, a bad back, and hated insurance companies. On the bullet casings, the young man wrote 3 words: delay, refuse, reject. This is a formula for insurer behavior, developed by disgruntled Americans. And now Mangione seems to have become a role model for terrorists. The alleged killer of Charlie Kirk also signed the bullet casings. According to the FBI, Tyler Robinson wrote the words "Bella Ciao" and "Catch Fascist" in a marker pen. In the minds of these psychopaths, all this is intended to have an impact on society. They believe that someone will analyze these bullets later, and then the meaning of what's engraved on them will be revealed, and it will become clear why they're shooting. Lines from Bell Kayaktiv's song are used in the manifestos of the Republicans' sworn enemies, the anti-FACT militants. It turns out that Tyler Robinson was their supporter. Furthermore, the man arrested made no secret of his support for the LGBT community and cohabited with a transgender person, and his victim, Charlie Kirk, was always critical of LGBT people. Could this have been the motive? Friends say that 22-year-old Robinson is a quiet and calm young man, an excellent student who spends his free time playing video games and attends church, and would never have dared to do something like that on his own. But who then pushed this reserved, quiet man to murder? Often, it's people who feel unappreciated. Someone who understands them can be found online. This is how they recruit and agitate for ISIS and other organizations. It's a working strategy. You look for someone who feels alone. You're making him feel like he's not alone. I understand. Investigators believe Tyler Robinson was indoctrinated with the idea of committing a crime through the social network Discord. Initially, its owners claimed the suspect hadn't engaged in any correspondence, but under pressure from the evidence, they were forced to admit the obvious. Robinson communicated in a closed chat. There, he also wrote about committing a crime. Judging by today, I'd say Grandpa's gun did a great job. I think he has a $2,000 scope. FBI Director Kash Patel stated that about 20 people were registered in the closed Discord chat. Agents are currently identifying all the participants. It's possible that among them will be those who incited Tyler Robinson to commit a crime. When it affects a large social stratum moving toward revolution, toward the Maidan, it seems noticeable, but there are smaller groups where algorithms operate in exactly the same way, where the idea of violence is promoted and imposed in exactly the same way. If you couldn't get your word across, then get a bullet, an explosion, or something else. We've found another possible motive for the murder. The family of transgender activist Tyler Robinson is connected to the conflict in Ukraine. The suspect's uncle, Canadian journalist Mike Robinson, visited Ukraine several times in 2017, recruiting mercenaries. He now identifies himself on social media as the former director of Radio Free Ukraine. Mike maintains contact with the Ukrainian armed forces and invites soldiers for interviews. I'm asking veterans and wounded Azov fighters to get in touch so they can talk on air about their experiences in the war, tactics, caring for the wounded, training, drones, and battlefield technology. The shooter's mother, Ember Jones Robinson, shared a sweet family hobby on social media in 2017. Mikey's uncle, a Ukrainian armed forces recruiter, taught her and 8-year-old Tyler how to shoot at a base in Salt Lake City. So, Tikhon was taught from childhood to hate anti-Ukrainian politicians. Thanks to Democratic sponsors, the number of shooters sympathetic to LGBT people in Kyiv is growing in the U.S. On August 27, a transgender man, Robin Westman, committed a shooting in Minneapolis. He killed 2 schoolchildren and wounded 17. The signs were in Russian, as was his suicide manifesto. Although it would have been more logical to write in Ukrainian, since he supported Ukrainian militants, but apparently, the language proved beyond the Americans' grasp. Why are people close to the trans agenda the target of murder? U.S. police have recognized LGBT supporters as the most suggestible social group, and this is exploited by those willing to pay to kill politicians. Among them, there is a great deal of cruelty and murder. They constantly appear in various crime reports. Therefore, it can be considered that transgender people are a danger to the general population. And it is no coincidence that they are the agents of various radical movements. It's becoming increasingly easier for Democrats and LGBT activists to tap into the minds of their supporters, as Donald Trump increasingly angers the left, bans transgender people from serving in the military, and declares war on clinics that perform gender reassignments. The Open Society Foundation, founded by George and Alexander Soros, has always been the main sponsor of the transgender agenda. Now, through social media, its employees are brainwashing Democratic supporters and turning them into resistance fighters. The LGBT-sympathetic Antifa movement is already openly calling for violence against Trump supporters and labeling those who hold conservative views as fascists. But how did the leftist movement transform from genuine anti-fascists into an instrument of terror and intimidation against dissenters, and, in particular, those who defend traditional values? Under false banners, how did those who fought Mussolini and Hitler become an army of pogromists? The unknown assassination attempt on Trump. Why is the White House covering up the incident with the bomb and the presidential motorcade? Antifa, or anti-fascist action. Today, the world has become accustomed to the fact that activists of this movement have become an instrument of political struggle, participating in street riots. Always dressed in black, their faces covered with masks, essentially pogromists, but it wasn't always like this. Initially, anti-fascists were the name given to opponents of the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. And the first Antifa combat unit appeared in 1921. Its fighters called themselves People's Brave Men. Or, incidentally, they didn't hide their faces. As fascism spread across Europe, the ranks of its opponents grew. And then the Antifa symbol appeared, a bent arm with a clenched fist. Today, this symbol of the fight against Nazism has been co-opted by people of a completely different stripe. 1999, Yugoslavia. CIA color revolution specialists conceived and created the youth organization Otpor. It was tasked with overthrowing the government of the recalcitrant Slobodan Milosevic. Political strategists took a liking to the old leftist symbol of a raised fist. Later, George Soros's organizations adopted the image of a fist. Since then, not a single American-funded coup d'etat has been complete without such posters. And the Antifa movement itself, having lost its symbol, also lost its original noble meaning.
They stopped being anti-fascists long ago. They are absolute terrorists. Their actions always violate the criminal code. Their calls run counter to public opinion.
Modern Antifa is the vanguard of so-called neo-Marxists. These are marginalized individuals seeking the redistribution of wealth in favor of various minorities. There are conflicts on national, racial, and sexual grounds, conflicts between men and women, feminism, and all sorts of other artificially created conflicts. This is the essence of this neo-Marxism, this cultural Marxism. That is, to replace real class struggle with some fictitious, contrived conflicts, which are then inflated in every possible way. In the US, the reformation of Antifa began in the late 1980s in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was then that local teenagers organized the Anti-Racist Action Movement. It would seem that the fight against skinheads and the Ku Klux Klan was a noble mission. But only in the early years did the fighters wave posters and distribute leaflets. Quite soon, Antifa began to resort to physical violence, and over the years, these fighters against the idea of white supremacy turned into a veritable army. They have a
black uniform. They always wear black if they are going to do any of this kind of work. And we understand that yes, this is some kind of structure. I even called it DS Antifa, because it is absolutely the same totalitarian structure as it was under Hitler. The
Federation of Antifa militants in the US is a vast network. Here are just some of the branches. Antifa of the Rockies, Antifa of Atlanta, Antifa of the Seven Hills, Antifa of Sacramento, Antifa of Western North Carolina, the Pacific Northwest Antifa Working Collective. There are 200 units in the United States. That's hundreds of thousands of people ready to take to the streets on command. They're
paid. This has been proven. It's not a conspiracy theory. So no, guys, no so-called hobbyist organization. if you can call it that, will function as smoothly and perfectly as Antifa. It may look chaotic from the outside, but I have a feeling this chaos is also orchestrated and planned, just like the Maidan protests were planned. On
September 22, Trump signed an executive order banning Antifa. The movement has been officially designated as militaristic, terrorist, and openly calling for the overthrow of the U.S. government. Immediately after the executive order was issued, Trump began tightening the screws, ordering Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to send troops to Portland, where Antifa groups are particularly strong. And the U.S. Department of Justice ordered investigations into George Soros's structures in at least 6 states. The 95-year-old billionaire could be charged with fraud and providing material support for terrorism. How far will Trump go in his attempt to deprive the Democrats of their street army? And will he have the strength to do so? On
December 1, 1934, Sergei Kirov, a member of the Politburo, was assassinated in the Soviet Union, shot in the hallway of the Smolny Institute in Leningrad. It's not certain that the assassin was motivated by political motives. It was most likely personal revenge. Nevertheless, this incident launched a massive campaign to combat the so-called hostile element. So, Charles Kirk, assassinated in the US, could become the American Kirov. A British newspaper writes in this regard that this political assassination could very well trigger mass purges and pressure on Democratic Party supporters. Of course, this won't be a repeat of the Soviet repressions of the late 1930s, but the White House is already seriously considering introducing tough measures against non-profit organizations that support the Democrats, including revoking their tax breaks. Media outlets aligned with the Democratic Party have already come under attack. For example, the popular late-night television show Jimmy Kimmel Live was already shut down because the host accused Trump of trying to profit from Kirk's murder.
Trump has plenty of other reasons besides the murder of Charlie Kirk to hate anti-fact. In 2018, Hillary Clinton said that Democrats should stop behaving civilly toward Trump supporters. After this interview, Antifa radicals destroyed the Republican headquarters in New York. Antifa almost attacked Trump himself. To avoid further dividing American society, the U.S. is trying to keep quiet about one of the assassination attempts on Trump during his first term. Some details of the incident have been revealed. On August 31, 2017, Antifa extremists attempted to bomb Trump's motorcade. This footage was captured by onlookers. A car emerges from the forest to cut off the presidential motorcade, but crashes into a ditch, is damaged, and stalls. Trump's security immediately intercepts the car. An explosive device was discovered in the Antifa fighter's car just in time. They are very dangerous because they can, in principle, be triggered by anything. This means that any company can immediately exploit this Antifa network, that is, radicals accustomed to fighting, accustomed to hooliganism, and misbehaving. They simply do this professionally. In June 2025, the FBI arrested another Antifa supporter. Peter Stinson, a former Coast Guard officer who plotted to assassinate Trump, has been arrested. All of his accounts were immediately deleted, but we have obtained a 19-page report from the FBI officer handling the case. It includes quotes from several statements Stinson made about Trump shortly before his arrest. Quote, "Stand together, we are Antifa. Together we can defeat fascism. Someone, please, just pull the trigger. I would do it. I would take responsibility to save America." Quote, "The White House administration's fight against extremists has reached a boiling point, but will Trump be able to suppress anti-fact? First, the presidential order conflicts with the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects freedom of expression, even for radical political views. Second, the order will be torpedoed by the Democratic Party's lawyers, who have numerous Antifa sponsors and the powerful National Lawyers League on their side. She saved the BLM rioters from prosecution and will likely try to save Antifa from Trump as well. The National Bar League is a byproduct of Soros's structures. We've uncovered evidence that the billionaire has extended his tentacles into the very heart of the American justice system. The Open Society Foundation donated $1 million to a Philadelphia legal defense center. One can only guess at the financial flows that Antifa sponsors annually send to Democratic lawyers. Antifa feels even more confident in Europe. Brussels politicians find it very convenient to label all dissenters as fascists. You
automatically become a Nazi or radical the moment you disagree with Germany's ruling elite. To become part of the elite, you have to be a Russophobe. And those who are being fought, no matter what, by whom, or by what means. These are, of course, mostly people who, well, at least, aren't Russophobes. For Russia, it would be enough to have people in power in Europe who are simply neutral toward them.
Only Hungary has spoken out against the Antifa movement at the state level in the EU. On September 26, a government meeting decided to designate it as terrorist. Prime Minister Orban announced that a blacklist of organizations close to the movement is currently being compiled. They face criminal prosecution. Other European countries remain loyal to Antifa, although sweeping their activities under the rug is becoming increasingly difficult. On September 14th of this year, elections were held in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany's most populous and economically developed region. City mayors, local council members, and district heads were elected. It would seem like a local political event. However, these elections turned into an international scandal. 16 candidates died before voting day. 7 of them represented the Alternative for Germany party, the one that advocates rapprochement with Russia. The other 7 deceased represented other parties but indulged in harsh anti-Ukrainian rhetoric. Law enforcement agencies in North Rhine-Westphalia found no criminal connection to this string of strange deaths, but acknowledged that it all seemed rather odd. We, however, managed to uncover something interesting in this regard. The close attention to events in North Rhine-Westphalia is understandable given that it is the most densely populated region in Germany. 14 million voters are registered there, accounting for 1 in 4 voters in the country. Success for the right-wing Alternative for Germany, AfD, party in the local elections would be a powerful blow to the current government. Few people are surprised by unfair competition for voters these days, but no one could have imagined that events in North Rhine-Westphalia would unfold in a criminal vein. Candidates began dying one after another. Official causes include age, illness, and suicide.
When did the public begin to question how this could have happened? Why did 6 people from the Alternative for Germany die there? Literally a day later, there were 7. The answer came in that they died of natural causes. And then they said, well, why? Other parties have also lost a few. Wait, at most 1 person each has died from the other parties. So, the chances of dying, becoming an AfD candidate, and then dying are, well, several times higher. There's even a joke challenge, like this. Run for the AfD and survive until the elections. Olga Pedersen, a former AfD member of parliament, is following this detective story with particular attention. Former party colleagues report the latest news, which is often simply baffling. Why haven't criminal cases been opened in most of these cases? I know of one case where it was immediately clear the person didn't die of natural causes, but it was quickly closed and ruled as suicide. A typical suicide, as I joked. 3 shots to the back of the head. Why did I joke? Because it's clear the man didn't die a natural death, but but we're still being denied details of what exactly happened, citing privacy and family protection.
Skepticism is growing among Germans. Even the deaths of 7 candidates didn't hinder the right-wing's success in North Rhine-Westphalia. The Alternative for Germany, AfD, tripled its 2020 result and received 14.5% of the vote, a surprisingly high figure for a territory that wasn't part of the State Duma. Therefore, AfD representatives are being persecuted at the state level. Right-wing politicians have been equated with Nazis and even declared extremists, but a complete ban on the AfD hasn't yet been achieved. Its interests are being lobbied for by Trump's team, which is fighting against Antifa. However, even with this protection, pressure from German intelligence and the government on the right continues unabated, and politicians who defend the interests of Antifa themselves utter Nazi slogans and endorse violence against political opponents. It is the Verfassungsschutz, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, and German counterintelligence that serve the German elite and curry favor with the government. They constantly try to smear political opponents. Der Spiegel, Channel 1 and Channel 2, ARD Television, and ZDF are all German, and a couple more, but here's the most recent example. The leader of the Green Party, while discussing the death of Charles Kirk on German television, uttered the phrase, "To each his own." A phrase that was written on the gates of Buchenwald. It's not surprising that the German Antifa has already been noted for calling for reprisals against members of the AfD in Hessen. In 2023, on the eve of the elections, this article was published on the website of anti-fascists in Germany. It remains only in the archives, having been removed from public view by a court order. It's high time to take a decisive stand against the AfD and its individual leaders. Together, we want to challenge them where they feel free and safe, be it a restaurant, a club, or their workplace. Below, we've published the personal information of 40 Alternative for Germany, AfD, candidates. This includes names, photographs, residential addresses, business information, and even the offices and restaurants where party representatives held meetings. This means any extremist could choose a target and show up. And what the authorities are currently testing in Germany could be applied in other EU countries as well.
Just over 2 years ago, correspondence from the Soros Open Society Foundation surfaced online. It informed employees that the foundation was henceforth ceasing its activities in EU countries and shifting its focus to Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkans, Albania, Kosovo, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, and Croatia. It was also reported that $1.5 billion would be allocated annually for programs in these countries. And the first results, it must be said, have already been achieved. For example, Moldova is being called a branch of the Soros Foundation. His former employee, Maia Sandu, is now the country's president. She and her entire team are giving the opposition no chance to participate in the political struggle, as evidenced by the results of the recent, so-called, elections. Soros's people are positioned in all key government positions in Moldova. And judging by the recent events in Serbia, that country is now in the Soros Foundation's sights. A branch of the alliance called Refuse Fascism has announced a mobilization of extremists in Washington against Trump. More protests and pogroms are scheduled for November 5th. This branch's militants have long since expanded beyond the United States and have been spotted several times in Germany. There, they also participated in riots and rallies against the German right. Someone approached a friend of mine at a rally, tapped me on the shoulder, and then fired several shots. He was wearing a bulletproof vest. Well, shoot something like an air pistol. It seems like a trivial matter, but in reality, society is constantly creating a mood where you have to walk around and look over your shoulder because you've been labeled an enemy of the fatherland. And here, everyone is focused on presenting such enemies as an alternative to Germany.
This exclusive document settles the question of who is sponsoring the Antifa pogroms in Germany, the US, Serbia, and other countries. the annual tax report of the Alliance for Global Justice. The Tice Foundation, founded by major Democratic Party donor George Soros, donated $50,000, and the Newbot Foundation $52,000. This charitable organization is controlled by the Clinton clan. Hillary Clinton served as the foundation's director for several years.
This funding is always packaged as some kind of NPO, some kind of non-profit organization, meaning it's quite hidden. And the radical wing of Antifa, which benefited from this funding, actually has no real need for it. Soros, Clinton, and a couple of other foundations funded precisely the processes that were supposed to change public morale. It's
astonishing, but the odious Soros and Clinton families managed to simultaneously fund both anti-fascists and Ukrainian neo-Nazis. These people don't need victory on the battlefield or in street clashes. Their goal is to reformat thinking and dehumanize their opponents. Certain successes on this front are already noticeable. Someone else's death is like a celebration. Why are many US citizens happy about the murder of Charlie Kirk? The Democrats' secret weapon. What is Google search really? It's not a tragedy, it's a victory. What goes around comes around. Similar comments about the death of Charles Kirk have literally flooded the American internet and led to layoffs. Hundreds of employees at airlines, television networks, and IT companies have lost their jobs. But the largest number of those fired or placed on indefinite leave are school teachers and university professors. It seems Trump supporters are even prepared to lynch those celebrating Kirk's murder. A similar online portal to the Ukrainian website, Peacemaker, has appeared in the United States, called Expose Charles Killers. It features the personal information of activists disloyal to Trump. The site's founders are unknown and are hiding behind the account Charlie Kirk Data Foundation. They have already received 50,000 links to pages of people celebrating the murder. Oddly enough, most of these celebrants are connected to the US education system. Universities and colleges in the West have long been a hotbed of neo-Marxism, an ideology that has nothing in common with traditional leftist ideas or communism. There was a time in Germany when, if I'm not mistaken, we had fewer than 20 professorships in pharmaceuticals and over 100 on LGBT issues. This is where we see the trick. Those who graduated from universities specializing in gender studies are now finding no work. A huge number of them have graduated. Where do they go? Well, mostly as kindergarten nannies. It all starts with kindergartens. Well, at least I can say this unequivocally about German society. One of the sponsors of neo-Marxism is the IT giant Google, a long-standing partner of the Democratic Party. The corporation slyly bribes professors through grants. For example, Dartmouth College professor Mark Bray received a payment from Google to create and publish a work on sociology. It was no coincidence that Bray chose the phenomenon of anti-fact. In this book, the movement is presented in a positive light, and violence is recognized as a necessary side effect. He even writes that this is outside the legal framework. But nevertheless, this is normal, because there must be forces in society that will somehow pressure the authorities, encourage them to make changes, and so on. But this person is starting to be invited everywhere, and yes, they are starting to be liked. Within the corporation, the rules are, one for all, and all for one. Former employees claim that the majority of Google employees and its parent company, Alphabet, wholeheartedly support Antifa and political violence. Financial statistics speak for themselves. Over 20 years, the company's employees have donated $15 million in personal contributions to Democratic Party funds. Republicans received only $5 million. Those who disagree with the party line are forced out of their jobs. A festering abscess was recently lanced by fired Google employee James Damore, a programmer. He was fired for not supporting left-wing views and opposing diversity policies. Damore filed a lawsuit against his former employer and revealed what goes on behind the scenes. Employees wish death on Trump and other Republicans. And according to research, in 2024, Google's search engine returned articles from Democratic media outlets in its news aggregator.
Of course, this is a professional algorithm, but this social stratification was programmed against the enemies of the West. This algorithm was supposed to divide Russia. This algorithm was supposed to divide China. And now it's beating and polarizing the pseudo-bourgeois, pseudo-just Western world.
According to surveys conducted by the international research company YUGAF after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, 1 in 5 liberals in the US said that the use of violence to achieve political goals is acceptable. Among conservatives, only 7% of respondents responded this way, while 55% of American leftists called the possible assassinations of Donald Trump and Elon Musk somewhat justifiable.
What is the main danger of political assassinations? They trigger a counter-wave of repression, which, in turn, provokes people to commit further political assassinations. And so on, a vicious circle ad infinitum. Precedents for this have already been created. Not long ago, at a rally in honor of Charles Kirk in the United States, a crowd nearly beat to death a Democrat provocateur who tried to disrupt the event. This news was immediately picked up by pro-Democrat media and social media. And politicians in this situation are undoubtedly trying to achieve their own goals by raking in the heat. And all of this is undoubtedly leading to heightened tensions in the country. Will the silent civil war in the United States escalate into open confrontation?